Thanks so much for joining. Tonight, we have Laura Hosid, who is a law school admission counselor, former Georgetown Law Career Services. Hey, Laura, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks so much. Excited for you to join. I know you have a lot of experience in admissions, experience with career services, and so I thought you'd be the perfect person to bring in to discuss everything admissions and career, networking, employment during COVID and how that's impacting everything. So I'd love for you to share your thoughts on everything in general. Folks, of course, as always, there's a chat function here. Feel free to pepper Laura with questions and she'll address them for you. And so, Laura, I'll hand it over you to take it away.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Steve mentioned, my background is that I went to law school ages ago, worked as a practicing lawyer for a while, and then mostly worked in law school career services at Georgetown and some other schools. Have been in private practice for a while, doing college admissions and law school admissions work, as well as career counseling, and then also worked in Georgetown's undergrad office as their pre-law advisor for about 2 semesters recently. But obviously, things are very different now, and it's sorry, I'm not used to talking. I'm used to talking to people that I'm seeing online, so it's a little bit funny not being able to see you all. But things are changing, and nobody really knows how COVID and the pandemic is going to affect law school admissions. There's a lot of speculation as far as, is it going to cause an increase in applicants? Is it going to cause a decrease? Is it going to make it easier? Is it going to make it harder to get in? And the honest answer is I don't know. And anybody who tries to tell you that they know, I would be a little wary, because I don't think anybody really knows what's going on. The latest I saw was that LSAT registration is way up recently, and that could mean more applicants, but we don't really know. So that is something that we will keep an eye on. Another big issue that is an unknown right now is deferrals. And whether a lot of students who were scheduled to start law school basically now, this week, Steve and I were just discussing how Zoom crashed this morning because all law schools and all colleges were all starting. And I don't think Zoom was quite able to handle the volume. But there are a lot of students who have requested deferrals because either their circumstances have changed and they need to wait a year, or they just don't want to go to school online. As you probably know, a lot of law schools have moved online for the fall semester. There are also a lot of international students who either can't physically come here if their school is starting in session, or they can't take classes online because of time zone issues or other considerations. So it is possible at some schools that they are going to allow students from this year to defer to next year, which will obviously, I don't know how many of you are applying in this cycle for next year. I'm guessing a lot of you on the call are, but those people could potentially be taking spots in the following year's class. So that's something to keep an eye on. There's also, some schools have gone to their wait lists more heavily this year. So when students are deferring, they're then replacing them with people from the wait list, which could mean that they, don't need to make up those spots next year, or it could mean they are going to increase spaces next year because they need the revenue. There's just a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty. And so the biggest, takeaway from tonight, I hope, is that just control what you can control. That is my message to everybody, is that there are so many unknowns and there's so many things that you can't control, that your job is just to submit the best application that you can, and to work on things like your personal statement, your grades, your LSAT score, anything that's under your control, and then just, put it all out there and hope for the best. I think one strategy that a lot of students that I work with are employing is to just sort of cast a wider net this year, because there's so much unknown, applying to possibly more schools than they would otherwise apply to, either because admissions are unknown, and also merit aid is another big thing that I think we're going to see a lot of changes with this year. I think that schools are sort of hurting for revenue, and that merit aid might be something that's going to suffer. Another big thing that's causing a lot of uncertainty is the election that's coming up. No one really knows how that is going to impact law school admissions. There was, you may have seen something called the Trump bump. In past years, there were more law school applicants, either because, people decided that they wanted to go to law school because they wanted to be involved in the administration, or they wanted to be involved in fixing things that they thought were wrong with the administration. Either way, elections do sometimes have some impact on, the legal market and whether people are going to law school. The economy is another big thing. There's, sort of the conventional wisdom is that law school is countercyclical, and when the economy is bad, a lot of people do go to law school because the job market is bad, and so they decide they'll wait it out in law school for 3 years, and things will get better, or they don't have a job, or they think that this will increase their job prospects. So that remains to be seen. There's also, of course, people can't necessarily afford to go to law school if the economy is bad. So it can kind of work either way, and that's something that we'll also be looking at very closely. As far as other things that are going to potentially change this cycle, for those of you who are applying, a lot of students that I work with are having issues with things like recommendation letters because they, weren't able to develop relationships with their professors in the spring. They've been off campus for a while. They may be online this fall, or if you're out of school for a few years, then recommendation letters are always kind of an issue. But not having relationships with professors, that is something you can control to some extent. I mean, you can make an effort to reach out to professors online, they're home, they're bored. There are things you can do even if you aren't physically on campus. At the same time, admissions people get it. I mean, they understand that, that's one of the, I don't want to say one of the good things, but one thing about this situation is that everybody is impacted somewhat equally. It's not a regional thing, it's global. So, if you are turning in a transcript that has pass-fail grades from the spring of 2020, no one's really going to question that. I mean, there's certainly ways you can explain it on the application, but everybody's going to understand. If you don't have as impressive as a summer job as you would have liked, and you end up doing things virtually, obviously people are going to understand why that happened in summer 2020. But law schools, people top law schools are still looking for people who made the most of the situation. And like I said, control what you can control. So, it's too late for this summer, but for the fall, if you are involved in activities that are canceled, figure out a way to do it virtually, figure out a way to do something else. There are always things that you can do. It doesn't have to be, for those of you who are in college, it doesn't have to be through some sort of organized, organized club or activity. There are things you can do on your own. Law schools just want to see that you're the kind of person who makes the most of your time and does something productive, even if your original plans got changed. So that being said, again, they understand, they get it. If things look a little bit different, those are things you can explain in your application, but don't worry about the fact that you don't have, like I said, as impressive of a summer job as you want, or things like that. Those, let's see, canceled activities. Yeah, those were all teacher recommendations. Another thing that I would say is that, if you are applying this fall, my strong recommendation would be to get your applications in as early as possible, because a lot of the speculation about the increase in applicants this year, my guess is that a lot of the applications are going to come a little bit later in the cycle. either because of, like I mentioned, because of the election, or, you know, people are just sort of starting to get their act together and think about, now that, you know, the summer's over, the virus isn't really going anywhere. They're sort of making plans for the future. Like I said, the October LSAT has, you know, Steve probably knows the numbers. I don't know the numbers, but a huge increase in applications. And so all those people aren't going to be sending their applications until after they get their scores back from October. So if you are in a position where you have already taken the LSAT and are applying for this year, get your applications in as early as you possibly can. I do think early decision is probably going to play a larger role than it may have otherwise in past years. Purely speculation, but, you know, law schools are facing all of the same uncertainty that we are dealing with, and they need revenue. And so if you're applying early decision and you're committing to attend and you are a reasonable candidate, they're still not going to take people who aren't qualified and who aren't going to be successful at their school. But my guess is that they are going to be more inclined to take people who they know they can lock in. Oh, look, there's a chat. Is November early enough? Yeah, I think November. I mean, I usually say by Thanksgiving at the latest. You know, if you can apply earlier, I would try to get them in October, but I still think, you know, Thanksgiving at the latest. And then what is a general recommendation for an early application, like a date? I like students to get it in by early October. I don't think, you know, as you probably know, September 1 is when most of the applications are opening. A few, I think Michigan is open already, a handful of others are open, but most don't open until September 1st. And I like my students to get them in by October if they're not waiting for anything. November is fine also. I don't think anyone is actually reading or responding to applications in September, so I don't think there's any advantage to rushing to get something in the first week of September by any means. Let's see, what else? Deciding where to apply is also a little bit challenging, because you can't visit schools. You can't necessarily sit in on classes. There's a lot of things you may not be able to do. On the flip side, I think that law schools and colleges, grad programs, everyone is sort of bending over backwards to put a lot more information online because they know that you can't visit. So there are all kinds of admission sessions, you know, virtual admission sessions, things with the dean of admissions talking, things where you can, you know, student panels. A lot of law schools are, you know, willing to set you up to talk to a professor or a student. There's all kinds of things that you can do to research schools online to figure out, you know, what's a really good fit for you, and then also to be able to write a, you know, compelling supplement about why you are a good fit for this school. So, you know, take advantage of whatever is offered, because, you know, while law schools don't necessarily take into account demonstrated interest the same way that colleges do, I still think if you are someone who, you know, can show that you are really interested in their school, I think it's going to help, because that's something, you know, they want people who are going to accept their offer. Okay, more chat. Sorry, I'm not used to doing webinars in this format. Okay, do I think acceptance rates will increase if schools move online? I'm not sure that they're really, you know, if you're talking about schools moving online permanently, I don't really see that happening. You know, if schools are online, I know a lot of schools have recently gone to online for the fall and likely, quite honestly, throughout the year. But I don't think that that's necessarily going to directly impact acceptance rates. I don't think that they're going to all of a sudden, I mean, yeah, technically they can physically accommodate more students, because they're, you know, it's a virtual classroom. There's not an issue of seats. But I still think at the more selective schools, they're not going to be dramatically increasing their class sizes just because it's virtual, because they hope to go back to being in person, and because they just, you know, they want to maintain their selectivity and their reputation. How do I think COVID will affect the importance of applying early this year? I do think that that COVID will impact it. And because, like I said, I think that schools are dealing with the same uncertainty we are, and they want to lock in good candidates, especially good candidates who, especially early decision candidates who they know are going to pay full price. But I just think with all the uncertainty, it's always better to apply early, because you just think about it psychologically. The first, the first couple of applications, I mean, obviously we're dealing with bigger numbers, but the first ones they see are more interesting and exciting, and the more they see, the bigger the pool gets, the harder it is to stand out, and the more spots that they have already filled, and the more merit money that they've already given out. So I always think it's better to apply early when you can. And that being said, like it's still fine to apply late. Don't take this to mean you can't apply. I mean, deadlines are February, March, and every year I have students who apply that late and still get accepted. So I think that's totally fine. Let's see. Do I think it would be wise to take the October LSAT with the knowledge that a lot of the registrants are doing so unprepared? As long as you're prepared, I wouldn't take it if you were not prepared. But I wouldn't worry too much about the curve and the other applicants and all of that. I would just, when you are prepared and you are ready to take it and give it your best shot, that's when I would do it. Applying early if you're waiting to retake the LSAT for a higher score, that is a much trickier issue. And it depends on how close you are and how much you think you're going to improve, which obviously, are things you can't predict, but that's a tougher issue. And I have this conversation with students every year, and sometimes it makes sense to apply, and other times you're better off holding out and waiting for that score, because sometimes you can tell a law school that you're waiting to retake it, but they won't always wait. So you may be better off waiting and holding off on your application. So sorry, that's not one I can give a general answer to. As far as the visiting, and figuring out where to apply, LSAC, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, they typically do these forums around the country, where it's just like a big fair basically, but there's tons of information about applying, about financial aid, the individual schools, and they're really worthwhile, the in-person ones when you can attend. And the good news is they're doing them virtually. So I believe there's one in September. The first one's in September. I think they're once a month throughout the fall. And there's no excuse not to register and go. It's virtual. And you can really make connections with, the admissions representatives want to meet students, and they want to put faces to names, and they want to be able to, get to know people and help you and, find people that they like and want to admit. Again, this is not going to, you want to go to Harvard and you have a 145 on your LSAT. It doesn't matter how charming you are when you meet the admissions rep. However, on the margins, I think it can make a difference, and you can ask questions and you can learn a lot. Okay, let's see. How many schools do I recommend applying to? That is also a sort of it depends question, in the sense that it's different than undergrad, because you don't need a safety school. You don't need any safety schools. You might decide, I'm only going to law school if I can get into one of these schools. So in that case, you just apply to the schools that you're interested in. If you definitely want to go to law school no matter what, well then yeah, you need to have safer schools. And I think this year, like I said, I would cast a little bit of a wider net. I think it depends if you are, interested in merit money. Those students tend to apply to a lot more schools, because you're, just sort of throwing it out there to see what happens. You need to balance the time that you have, the money you want to spend on application fees, the time that you have to do a good job on the applications. You don't want to be doing so many that you're spread too thin and, sort of doing a not so great job on the supplemental applications. So a lot of my students will have like an A list and a B list, and sometimes even a C list. And, the ones that are most important, they'll focus on them, they'll prioritize them, they'll get them in October, November, and then they'll move on and apply to some others. And so that's one strategy that you can think about. But a lot of students don't apply to a ton of schools because they're often limited by geography at this point. And, they either want to be in a certain part of the country or they only want to be in certain cities. And that, sort of goes to what I'll talk about in a minute as far as taking into account where you might want to practice geographically and your career aspirations when you're choosing where you want to go. All right, I'm getting very behind here. Time limit on recommendation letters. No, I think that, you want to have a professor. You want to have it, even if you've been out of school for a few years, you want to have someone who can speak to you in an academic setting to what you're going to be like in the classroom. So if you graduated 6 years ago, then your letters are going to be, 6 years. I mean, okay, this person said they actually had them written then. I think it's fine. I mean, I might reach out to them and sort of check in and say, I don't know if you remember, you wrote this recommendation for me. I was wondering, maybe they have time since they're stuck at home also to chat with you for, 20 minutes on a Zoom call or on the phone. So you can sort of tell them why you're interested in law school and they can update the letter a tiny bit. But even if you ask them to write it now, they would still be writing about things that happened 6 years ago. So it's actually better that they've already written it when it was fresher in their mind. What do the LSAT margins look like for T14 schools? I don't see much changing, honestly. I think the T14 schools are still going to have their pick of applicants. And so I don't see much changing as far as what they're looking for in GPA and LSAT score. If you apply early decision in November, how long does it take for schools to get back to you? That varies a lot. My guess is it'll be a little slower this year because I think, again, uncertainty being the word of the day, I think they're going to be waiting a little bit to sort of see what the overall pool is going to look like. So whereas it, in other years could be sort of pretty quick if they wanted you, my guess it's going to be a little while this time. Personal statement, I think, is very important. I think even more so this year. I think it's more straightforward than undergrad in that they really do want to see some sort of reason why you are interested in going to law school or being a lawyer. Because plenty of people apply to law school and don't end up going, and they don't want to waste their time, or they apply to law school, go for their first year, and then drop out because they realize this isn't the right path. So they really want to see that you are committed and sort of understand what you're getting into, and really have a reason for wanting to go to law school, not even necessarily their school, just law school in general, or that you want to be a lawyer, and that you sort of understand that is. And so what makes a personal statement stand out? I mean, I think avoiding all of the cliche and generic, like I, grew up watching Law and Order. My parents always, I always made a good argument for extra dessert, and my parents told me I would be a good lawyer. So you want to avoid sort of cliche things like that. And, just really talk about what attracts you to law school, and, use some sort of personal anecdotes and, stories from your life. But, you don't need to know exactly what type of law you want to practice, but you should have some sort of, understanding of what it means to go to law school and be a lawyer, and not just, I kind of like I did. I went to college, didn't have anything better to do, and did well on the LSAT and decided I would take a shot at law school. Worked out okay for me. But in general, you want to avoid that. Okay, I think those are all the questions, and glad that Steve is chiming in with his expertise on the LSAT, which is clearly not my expertise. Okay, so thinking about, and as Steve said, my background is in career services. That's where I spent the most amount of time in law schools. And so I really encourage students to think about what they might want to do after graduation. Not so much what type of law, but although, there is a lot of talk about like which types of law are going to thrive after this, pandemic, recession, whatever happened. Certain types of law, bankruptcy lawyers are going to be in high demand. Certain types of law tend to expand and others contract, given the economy. So I think thinking about whether you want to go into the private sector or the public sector. If you know you're going into the public sector after graduation, public sector lawyers don't make a whole lot of money. So you might want to think about looking at schools where you might have a better shot at getting merit aid and are not going to graduate with as much debt. You also might want to look at the loan repayment assistance programs, LRAPs, that some of the, typically the more selective schools offer, where, there's basically loan forgiveness if you go into certain professions. They all have different kinds of rules, but that's something that you can look at. If you know you definitely want to go to a big law firm after graduation, well, then go to the best law school you can get into. Firms tend to be all about prestige of the law schools, and you can look and see, you can contact the career services at the different law schools and see which law firms recruit on their campus. Doesn't mean you can't get a job at a law firm if they don't recruit on that campus, but it certainly signals that that law firm is invested in hiring from that law school if they physically, or this year virtually, I guess, come to campus to recruit. You can get all kinds of employment data from career services offices, not only who recruits on campus, but where students are going for summer internships, where students are going after graduation. There's all kinds of data that they should be able to provide to you. They're required to collect it. I used to have to help collect it. That kind of was really not fun, to track down people and ask them how much money they were making. It was kind of awkward, but it's helpful for you as an applicant to see where students are going. The other thing is geography. I think that a lot of the legal job market, and any job market really, relies on networking. And so where the alums from the particular law school are practicing is going to have a big impact. And so this is something, again, you can find out from the career services. You can also play around on LinkedIn and just do a search for, if you are interested in going to law school at Georgetown, but know that you want to end up in San Francisco ultimately, well, you can play with the filters on LinkedIn and look up Georgetown law alumni in the Bay Area and see what they're doing and how many of them are there, and get a sense. And so, which goes to my next point, is that if you go to a T14 school, or, a handful of others that have national reputations, then fine, it doesn't matter. If you want to practice in San Francisco and go to Georgetown, great, you'll be fine. However, if you want to practice in DC, you are arguably better off going to a lower ranked school, like, let's say, American or Catholic or Howard, than possibly a slightly higher ranked school that is in another part of the country. Because Catholic, I don't even know what they're ranked, but I worked there briefly. Like, they have a very strong alumni network in DC. So if you're at the top of your class and you want to work in DC, you're going to be in decent shape. Whereas if you are at an equivalently ranked school in another city, it's going to be more difficult to break into the DC market. So that's just something you want to consider if you're not looking at the top of the top, where you're basically going to be fine anywhere. Okay, so let me go back to the questions here. Semi-dramatic shift in GPA. Yes, I think that is something, that's something that they see all the time. There's often, someone I talked to yesterday has a 3.0, but if you look at his grades from freshman year when he started as an engineering student compared to sophomore and junior year when he had switched out to something in the humanities, there's a dramatic difference. And that's where the GPA addendum comes in, and you can call attention to it. Clearly if they look carefully at the transcript, they can figure it out, but why make them do the work? Like, that's what the GPA addendum is for you to highlight, it's not an essay, it's just a very factual statement, like, 3.3, like, you just explain. And, my more recent 2 years where my GPA was a 3.95 is much more reflective of my potential in law school, blah, blah, blah. Um, and just, do the math for them. Okay, for personal, oh, and then, sorry, you had another question. If mental health played a role in that, I mean, that's a little bit trickier. And you want to be mindful of the way that you explain it. And it's really up to you. Some people say, I don't, I'm just going to put it out there. And if that's a problem if that's a red flag for the school, then so be it. It's not, it's not necessarily fair, but that's not a place I want to be if that's going to be a problem. Or if you, want to be a little bit more cautious in case it would be a red flag, then you just, need to be careful in how you explain it, while still being truthful, obviously. And sometimes it depends, what types of issues that you're talking about, and how you can explain it. And most importantly, how to basically take away any concern for them that it's going to be a recurring problem when you're in law school. Okay, personal experiences with advocacy, great. Yeah, I mean, those are absolutely things that you can highlight, and should highlight. Whether or not that's something that you want to do as your career, it's still something that you can highlight because I think that that's a valuable skill. Even if you're going to be a bankruptcy lawyer at a big firm, you're, hopefully still going to be doing some pro bono work in some capacity and, using your legal skills to advocate for some group. And that's something that they care about. Resume stand out if you're not able to get a ton of internship experience. Doesn't have to be internships. I will tell you, law school admissions and employers, when you are in law school and out of law school, are equally impressed by someone who, waited tables. They want to see that you're using your time productively. And if it's, if your parents had a friend and you were able to get a, cushy legal internship, great. But if not, there's no expectation that you have a legal experience before you get to law school. It can be helpful, but it's definitely not necessary. And like I said, waiting tables, everybody knows how hard of a job that is and how important people skills are to being a lawyer. And so it's, people also have to work at work-study jobs, scanning cards at the library to put themselves through school. It doesn't matter. They just want to see what you're doing with your time, and that you are successful in the classroom. So your grades are going to matter a lot more than your resume. Now, if you have nothing on your resume because you were playing video games all summer, then, that's another issue. But it doesn't, internships versus other sorts of volunteer or paid work, doesn't matter. Personal statement about COVID or Black Lives Matter. That is a tough one. And I think there can be times where that is okay. If you really have something to say that you feel like is unique. Remember, these are things that everybody experienced. And so it would have to be something that was going to be unique because, yeah, I mean, that's what we're hearing from admissions officers. They're going to get a ton of essays that talk about it. And so if you're able to say something unique, great. But, in most of your cases, my guess is that isn't the most defining thing. That's not the most interesting thing about you. Maybe it is, and maybe you had some unique experiences and great, but, think about whether that is really going to make you stand out. That's what I always say with the personal statement. If you've got, other applicants with the same grades and the same LSAT score, is that really going to make you stand out and think, is it going to make the reader think, here's someone who would really be an asset to our community and is going to bring an interesting perspective to classroom discussions. So if you have something interesting to say about COVID or Black Lives Matter, by all means, but just think about whether it is something that is unique enough to make you stand out from other applicants who live through the same thing. Okay, back to, I think we're done with the questions. That was one of the things I was going to talk about. Yeah, really. I mean, I think I've covered most of the topics that I wanted to mention. I really, I harp on the career thing all the time, just because I think that, unlike undergrad, it's all about, finding the right fit and having, a great experience and really growing. And, I always tell students, don't even look at the rankings. It doesn't matter. But with law school, it's kind of, you're going to law school to become a lawyer. And so, you want to think about what's going to position you the best in the job market. It doesn't matter, you don't need to be looking for a certain major. Certain schools are, known for certain things and have different clinics and different journals. But for the most part, you can become a certain type of lawyer at any of these schools. Everybody takes the same curriculum, your 1L year. After that, certainly different schools have different classes, but for the most part, it's about where you end up interning. Your 1L summer and your 2L summer has a much bigger impact on, what type of work you're likely to end up doing. That is, one other factor is some schools make it easier to intern during the school year. This is of course assuming things return to normal by next year, or some version of normal. When you're at Georgetown, a lot of my students would have, their 2L year, their 3L year, they would have internships during the semester, because it was very easy. It's a 10-minute walk to the Senate or the courthouse. If you are in a more remote location, if you're at UVA, I love Charlottesville, it's great, but like there might not be as many opportunities to intern during the year. So that's just something to think about when you're thinking about building your resume for your legal jobs. Yeah. Does anybody, any more questions in the chat? I like answering questions because I feel like I'm not talking to myself. Okay. So, yeah, I think, like I said, just focus on the things that you can control. Really put a lot of thought into your personal statement, into the supplemental essays. Whenever something says that it's optional, it is not optional. If you want to go to that school, most schools have an optional diversity statement. There are obvious diversity categories, underrepresented minorities, and things like that. However, I think that a lot of the questions are worded very broadly. And so if you bring think about what they're looking for. They want different perspectives for classroom discussion. So if you have any sort of background, even if it's not what you would classically think of as diversity, if you have an interesting background that you think is reasonable to write about in a diversity statement, I would err on the side of writing it. Let's see. How can you decide whether topic should be for personal statement versus diversity? I think you want your best topic to be the personal statement, and then the diversity. You want to think of your application as a whole, so you don't want to repeat the same thing in the two. That would kind of be silly. But I would make the stronger one the personal statement, because I think that's just what admissions officers read first. Submit all optional essays if you were really serious about that school. Yeah, I mean, if it said, like, what was Michigan? I guess I was just looking at Michigan because they're one of the ones that is open, and it. I think it says to do no more than 2 of the 8. So follow directions. If they say no more than 2, don't do any more than 2. But if there are 8 choices and it says you can submit 0, 1, or 2, and you submit 0 or 1, if I'm the Michigan admissions officer, I'm going to think, well, how much does she really want to go here if she, couldn't be bothered to write 2 when you're allowed to put 2? The best application I've read in my career, that's a really hard one. I have read so many. A lot of the law school ones, I think the ones that, all right, one just popped into my mind. I don't know if it's the best one, but I thought it was just a really interesting take. A student who was very interested in issues, women in the legal profession. She was interested in gender issues, but her take on it was women in the corporate world, which is, when you first think about it, you're like, like it's not all that sympathetic of a cause. But the way she talked about it, and she had a internship at an accounting firm or some such thing when she was in college, and she just really had some thoughtful things to say about sort of corporate structure and how it affected women and what she was going to do about it in law school. She was also just a really nice person, and she ended up at Cornell, so she did well. Disabilities for diversity statements, great. It obviously depends on the disability, but if it's something that has impacted you in some way, and you think it just gives you a different outlook on life that would cause you to contribute to discussions in law school, sure. Let's see. Do they look down on disabilities? No, I really don't. I don't think so at all. Again, I don't know what we're talking about, so it depends on what the disability is. But no, they, there certainly should not be any discrimination towards disabilities. I think the mental health stuff gets a little trickier, so it does depend on what you're talking about. But you also want to think about it from their perspective and whether it's anything that is going to cause them to worry about your ability to be successful in law school. And so if you have a disability, but you have, not overcome it, but, found ways to adapt and been successful in undergrad, well then, no, that's, all the more impressive that you were able to succeed. PTSD from combat be a red flag. Possibly. I guess it would depend on how it was affecting you. It's hard to answer. But I'm sure it's nothing that they haven't seen before. And it just depends on how it's impacting you, and whether, the red flag is whether it's going to impact your ability to be successful in law school. But yes, current code, yeah, it's all in how you present it, and you always want to frame everything in a positive way.
I think we're there, Laura, but thank you for a fascinating discussion and presentation. I feel like you hit all the major areas, both admissions and the career aspect and the rankings and how COVID's impacting everything. So I just want to thank you for sharing your insights and your experience from all the different ways you've been involved in the law school world. I feel like you addressed some great questions. As we saw, some of them are kind of nuanced and it's more in the details, but I think you hit the major points. So I really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with everyone. And I appreciate all the great questions everyone asked in the chat here.
Yeah, thank you for the questions were great. And I wish I had a crystal ball, and I wish I could give you some more clear answers, but like I said, control what you can control. And we're just going to have to wait and see how this all affects law school admissions.
Yeah, like you said, nobody really knows everything about exactly what's going to happen, but I think your insights and experience really help to at least make some educated guesses, which is the best we can do right now, of course. So, Laura, do you want to share with everyone the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they're interested in following up with you about potentially your services and such?
Oh, sure. My website is just my name, Laura Hosid, LauraHosid.com. And feel free to email me and get in touch. And I wish you all the best of luck. And it's going to be an interesting year.
It definitely will be. Well, thank you again, Laura. I definitely encourage folks to get in touch with you. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.